Hello, one and all, and welcome to a humble pie edition of the week that really was, where your host, John McGurk, um, is mortified for getting a prediction wrong last week. Although I did get one right as well. We'll come to that later on. But first, Sarah, are you ready to administer me my punishment beating for being so god awfully wrong about Joe Biden's debate performance?
No, I would never. Um,
I'd do it to you.
I know, but I'm just a nicer person. Uh, no, I mean, look, I think I think you were right if he didn't have a serious cognitive decline problem, but he does. And we've been told by the mainstream media for a while that for a long time that that was not true. And I had the unfair disadvantage of spotting a couple of weird physical kind of, I don't know, things that reminded me of someone I know who's gone through that. And so I was strongly suspicious that there was something afoot, and there is.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, as we're talking now this evening, the President of the United States is basically, he said to a group of donors last night that he was physically fine. It was just that there was a problem with his brain. That's an actual quote. And he also said that he'd be up for the job as long as he had more time off to rest, which isn't exactly something that you need from the President of the United States. So yeah, I think he's as done can be at this stage.
but
Uh,
what they're going to do is the interesting thing. I mean, Kamala, there's that option, or then there's obviously like swapping someone completely new in, like Gavin Newsom or whatever. But I think they're in a bit of a pickle, and I think Joe Biden seems like a really nice man and everything, and I think that there's people around him and people in the DNC who ought to be ashamed of themselves that they've allowed the legacy of this person to end like this.
yeah, true.
Because the media has been hiding this and everybody's been pretending that this wasn't true for a long, long time. But you know, and I know that the people who are around him and people who are around somebody like that in political circles will have known this was coming, will have spotted it. They honestly expect us to believe that they really believe that he has 4 years in him.
Yeah, I mean,
And they knew he didn't, and they spent all their time like completely consumed with chasing Donald Trump through the courts, whatever, when they should have been getting their act together and getting a good candidate, a replacement candidate, so that he can be the grandfather, elder, wiser person of the party, give advice and show up and shake hands at things, hand over the reins to somebody else. And they didn't. And now it's a mess.
it is. I suppose their other option is just to take their beating and do sort of look, Trump is going to win, vote for Democratic congressmen and senators to keep him in check. Sort of campaign. I suspect that if they don't do anything, that's what Democratic congressmen and senators are going to start doing fairly lively anyway. And it's interesting actually, if you look at the Senate polling, the Democrats are running ahead of Biden in a lot of races. I'm not saying they're going to win the election there or anything, but there are people voting for Democratic senators who aren't voting for Joe Biden. So if he isn't replaced on the ticket, that's inevitably going to happen on its own. Anyway, this is not an American podcast, it's an Irish podcast, and there are lots of things that happened in Ireland this week. Including, I mean, I did get one prediction right last week, as I mentioned a second ago, which was that I said that this whole Natasha O'Brien thing would mutate very quickly into being a conversation about the badness of Irish men in general and not about the legal justice system. And lo and behold, I see Thomas Pringle standing up on the Oireachtas in the middle of the week this week to say just that. He said, we have to do something about our young men. Our young men are the problem. Which is, they just always default to this, don't they?
Yeah, because it's always our fault. It's great though, because it means that there doesn't have to be any legislative reform. There doesn't have to be any ownership by any government department. And obviously, like, I appreciate that the government or the Department of Justice, for example, can't take personal responsibility for every individual case that happens. Like, human beings are human beings, interactions between human beings are going to turn violent. That's the nature of human beings and all of that. But there is a lot of public desire, I think, for changes to the law, changes to sentencing law. And instead of sticking around to have deep and, worthwhile conversations about what that might look like, it's a really good avoidance tactic to move the conversation swiftly on to what we're doing wrong that makes us kind of deserve this. And that's what it is. It's the same old, same old. It's done with so many other things, and this isn't going to be any different. And you were absolutely right. I don't think it took till the middle of the week. I think the day after we had the podcast, I saw an article talking about, what does this mean about Irish men or whatever. Crotty is not like a representative of Irish men. I don't know any Irish men personally who beat up women on nights out. I don't know any Irish men personally who send messages to their friend with things like two to put her down and two to knock her out. I don't know anybody like that. And I don't, not only do I not know any men who do that, but I don't know any men who would receive a message like that from another man and go, oh yeah, that's hilarious. So he's not a representative. He's not he's an anomaly. But anomaly, the law should be there to treat anomalies like him with contempt, that the contempt and the sentencing that they deserve, not another dose of, well, guys, speak to your uncles and your brothers and your male friends and tell them not to rape and beat up women. No, I won't, because they don't.
But the Ross goes deeper than karate. I mean, I'm speaking to you from Krakow this evening, on my travels again. And before we recorded the podcast, I was wandering through the old town here, which is now, admittedly, it's a kind of heavy tourist spot, but so is central Dublin. Um, and I spotted in the corner of the street a sort of a man. I want to say an old man, but he wasn't old. He wasn't Joe Biden old. He was maybe in his 50s, 60s, and he was stocious drunk in the middle of the afternoon, or the early evening, and had the sort of paper bottle which clearly had whiskey or something inside it and was sitting in a doorway. And you know what the difference between Krakow and Dublin is? There were three policemen around him, and there was a police van there, and they bundled him into it and drove him away for being, I presume, drunk and disorderly in a public place. That just doesn't happen in Ireland. There's it must be said, the man was doing no particular harm to anybody. He was just sitting there getting off his face because presumably there's something terrible has happened in his life, and hopefully that works out for him. But there was an immediate reaction by the police force to go, no, that's not acceptable behavior. Whatever the problems in your life might be, that is not acceptable behavior in a public place. It lowers the atmosphere for everybody else. We're going to take you away from here and put you somewhere else. And maybe we'll get you treatment. Maybe we'll put you in a jail cell. I don't know what happened to him. I have no idea. But in Dublin, he'd still be sitting there, probably with four of his mates. It's not a problem with Irish men. It's a problem with the Irish legal and criminal justice system and what we tolerate as a society. We've had this conversation so many times, it's almost pointless to have it again. But honest to God, I mean, and like as an Irish person just walking through Krakow observing this, I was like, it felt foreign. It actually felt foreign. It brought home to the fact that I'm in a foreign country to watch what would have been 20 years ago, I think, even in Ireland, basic bit of police work.
Yeah. I mean, my observation of that, I think, is, well, overall, it's like at every layer of our justice system, there's a lack of consequence. So, like, to your point, I mean, my dad was an MEP many moons ago. I'm 40 now. When I was 21, my dad was in Brussels, and I remember going to Brussels, and my brother and I would go over, and my dad I had an apartment, and we'd stay in the apartment, bring our friends over, and we'd all go out. And I remember like being really struck even back then, and Brussels might be totally different now. So before anybody starts adding me, it might have changed, whatever. But at the time, being really aware of the, like, pardon the language for the expression, but the, like, you fuck around and find out in Brussels. So I can distinctly remember like seeing someone peeing, a man peeing in the street, bang, into the back of a Mariah van, off you go, done. Guys fighting, like police were there in minutes, all of them into the back of vans, done. Like there was just an immediate consequence to behavior. And we don't have consequence at that level, at the street level. We don't have consequence at the legal level. And so the public are starting to become more and more angry and frustrated with the fact that there just doesn't seem to be any consequence.
Yeah.
You're drinking in the street, like you're saying, somebody will do something, there will be a consequence. And in Dublin, there isn't. Like, of course, there's consequences when it suits. But there's not consequences for those kind of micro things that happen on the street. And in other cities, not every city, I mean, somebody who I was discussing with you before we came onto the podcast was giving me some feedback about how you're overly complimentary about other cities and they have their own hospitals and problems and whatever. And I'm not saying that every other city is some kind of Simpsons type, like euphoric city where you skip around and nothing bad ever happens. But, we spent the last 2 weeks talking about the sentencing of Crotty, for example, or lack thereof. and how that's impacted. But also, a Canadian tourist died this week
Mhm.
after being assaulted in the city centre. A 41-year-old man who died in a Dublin hospital with his family sitting around him. And that's much less talked about. And there should be consequences for these things, and
Yeah,
there
it's
doesn't seem to be.
our now annual foreign tourist murdered in the centre of
Yeah,
Dublin. But it's interesting the point you
yeah.
raised about praising other cities because I got some of this because last was it, I remember was it earlier this year or last year, I can't remember, when I was in Budapest. It wasn't that long ago, but I remember coming on this podcast and talking about how Budapest was so different to Dublin. I got about 5 or 6 emails, well-intentioned emails from people, now has to be said, saying, John, you were in Budapest. It is lovely, absolutely. But if you go 50 miles outside Budapest into some of the regional towns in Hungary, it's a different story altogether. And I don't
Yeah.
doubt that. I don't doubt it because what you say is right. Other societies have their problems. I'm sure if I venture into rural Poland, into some of the small farming villages, they'll be a lot worse off than some of the smaller towns in rural Ireland. 100%. I accept that. But the difference is, I'm in Krakow, I was in Budapest, two capital cities. Dublin is a capital city. It is where fully 1/3 of our population live. It is the main centre where most of our tourists arrive into Dublin Airport. It is the city that represents us to the world. And if you compare it to its peer cities in terms of what it's like to be, I mean, all these people emailing us in saying, "Oh, you're being too harsh in Dublin." I mean, my challenge to you is: are you going to go for a night out in O'Connell Street? I mean, what are you actually going to do if you go for a night out in O'Connell Street? In the first place, what are you going to do? Wander down Talbot Street for the fun? Flash the Americans through the portal that we had to close. It's if you compare Dublin to its peer cities, it's a disgrace. And actually, Kevin Myers has a piece in Gript on Sunday coming, which I'm going to take out from behind the paywall because it's so powerful. And he talks about the experience of people coming into Dublin City through the port, and what that's like because it's a journey he apparently takes fairly regularly. And it's just well worth reading. I won't spoil it, but if you keep an eye out on Sunday, do read it, and I will take it out from behind the paywall so everyone can read it because I think it's an important article. But yeah, it's just, and of course the political response is, I mean, how can we put this back on the public? It's the public's fault. No, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's not. You know what else is the public's fault? Racism.
Yes. Yeah, of
Racism.
course. Yeah.
Um, can I tell you
Which,
about the email I
by the
got this
way,
week?
by the way, an epidemic apparently.
An epidemic. I got an email this week. I want to mention this email because it's a good email. I
It's a
wrote a piece.
doozy. It's a doozy.
I wrote an email. I wrote an article on Tuesday of this week about the new racism czar, Dr. Ebun Joseph, who has been appointed by the government to handle basically the country's rampant racism problem and ensure that we all get better. More on that in a moment. But what I basically said was, look, this is a woman in the past has said that Ribena is racist because she received a glass of what was blackcurrant cordial in a Galway hotel a couple of years ago and assumed that she had been given it to make some kind of racist point. So I got an email from a lady whose name I won't use, who's an account director for a public relations firm, saying, "Hi, John, I hope you're well. I'm getting in contact on behalf of a company, proud owners of Ribena. We have come across your article and we kindly ask that you take down the image and the mention of Ribena in the headline and throughout the article, given the original tweets, i.e., Dr. Joseph's tweets, did not directly name the brand." So I just want to clarify on this podcast that
Could
when
have been my wadi. It could have been my wadi, in fairness. Yeah.
it could have been my waddy, but I just thought that gives you some insight into what PR people do for a living. I mean, I don't think there
But
was
can
any implication in my article that Ribena is actually racist. It is
I?
simply the most, it's a compliment, I think, to Ribena that when somebody says blackcurrant cordial, that's the first thing that comes to mind, isn't it? That kind of
Yeah,
indicates a
the
degree of,
brand is powerful.
yes. So there you go.
But
So
I don't understand, like genuinely, the inference. What's the inference that somebody gave her Ribena instead? So she ordered a glass of red wine and they gave her Ribena. But how would I don't get it. Am I missing something?
yeah, she seemed to think that it was kind of like a racist joke being made at her
But
expense.
why would Ribena instead of wine be race? Like, what would be is there a racial thing I'm missing?
Well, I don't think so. But like My point is
Okay.
broader than that, because let's assume that there is. Let's assume that there is some really obscure racial angle about black currant juice and dark skinned people. Let's assume that there is. Um, the point is, how does your brain work? Like, do you assume if somebody gives you a glass of Ribena instead of a glass of red wine, that it's somebody in a busy restaurant who's just cocked up? That probably it was there for a kid at another table
Yeah,
or something. But
of course.
is that the assumption, or is your assumption this is a racist act against me? Because this is the point. Dr. Joseph, Dr. Ebun Joseph, her first reaction was, this is likely racism. She didn't jump to, oh, this is likely an innocent mistake. This is likely a server who's really busy working and earning a whole lot of money, by the way, less money than I do, by the way, as an academic in UCD, who's under pressure and has made a mistake. It happens to us all. It's a bit annoying, but we'll get over it. No, her
Yeah.
reaction was, this is probably a low paid staff member making a racist joke at my expense. If that's how your brain works, and this is the point I was making in the article, then you see racism everywhere, which is why you're a really bad person to appoint to the job of detecting racism in the
Yeah.
country.
Well,
But the
this is the thing I talk about all the time uh, about being a woman as well, which is that like I actively choose not to see every time something disappointing has happened to me in my career, my job, or whatever. I actively choose not to see that as being because I'm a woman, because A, I don't see myself as a victim, nor do I ever want to be. B, I don't think it ever would be. I don't think that, misogyny is that much of a problem and that much ingrained in day-to-day society. I just don't. And see, it's not a good use of my time or energy to feel like everyone is against me all the time. It's a waste, and I don't want to live my life like that. And so, if all you see is racism everywhere, you'll find it. And if all I saw was misogyny and everything that happened to me, and that man just beeped at me when I pulled out in front of him because I'm a woman, no, it's just because I'm maybe a shit driver. Like it's that you're appointing someone who A, thinks that there's racism everywhere, and B, is now financially incentivized to see it everywhere.
Yeah, I mean it's extraordinary. If you read the new the action plan against racism, it's an astonishing document, and I wrote a piece on it for Thursday actually of this week, today as we're speaking, but yesterday as you're listening to this, or last Thursday if you're not listening to it on Friday, basically going through all the actions in the action plan, and it is extraordinary. I mean, basically taxpayer money is being deployed everywhere to I mean funding for media, for example, is now going to be tied. I mean, this is the risk, by the way, of state funding for media. Funding for media is now going to be tied to having, sufficient number of people of various racist, I said, that's a Freudian slip, but people of various races in every TV program. And if you don't, and that's going to be a criteria for funding. So, I mean, God love Fair City when they go and they say we want funding to make more episodes of our wonderful award-winning program. They're going to be told they're not going to get it unless they have four Chinese characters,
Yeah.
or a couple of black people and maybe a couple of Hispanics.
But
It's
also on RTE, she also was interviewed on RTE, and she said that, like it's not the gist of it was that, in workplaces, it's not our fault. We just haven't been trained not to be racist. And I take real exception to that. And that, and that there's no, like, people can just be racist and get away with it. There's no laws. Well, sorry, I think after a law degree and a year at the King's Inns, I can assure you that there are laws in place for what she's describing. Does she not know that?
There are anti-discrimination laws. There are, as we've said, there are hate crime laws on the books. There are all sorts of laws. But we're often accused of not getting angry enough on this podcast. But who the F does this woman think she is? You're
Yeah, yeah,
racist because you haven't been trained not to be racist.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
come down off your bloody high horse. Who trained you not to be racist? Is she basically telling us that her default state was racism
Yeah.
before she went to UCD and had it trained out of her? I mean,
But this is more, she's like I said last week about someone else, like she's enlightened and you're not. I have a friend, I think you've met her, she's at my wedding, she's American, she's black, she lives in Dublin now. I won't name her, but she obviously grew up in America and she's married to an Irishman now and she lives in Dublin. And we've spoken about this loads of times, and she's always says to me, she's like, systemic there is systemic racism built into the culture of America. she said, like, and I can point to ways in which that manifests itself in my life as growing up. And now I live in Dublin and I'm married in Dublin and I'm raising my family. And that simply doesn't exist in Ireland. And pretending and importing culture wars from other countries to give people jobs in Ireland is not appropriate. It's not true. And it will be long term, it will be detrimental to society, like, because the goal, or whether, well, not the goal, but the output of this, no matter what anybody says, will be to create a more divisive society.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens is that there is a constant conflation between race and culture. And by the
Yeah.
way, some people on the right are as guilty of this as people on the left. But I'll give you an example. So the racism plan says that Gardaí and state agencies have to be culturally sensitive when investigating particular crimes to various practices and ethnic traditions within minority racial groups. Now that's a tremendously vague statement. What does it mean,
Yeah.
for example, when it comes to investigating female genital mutilation? What does cultural sensitivity mean? I mean, does it mean that you have to accept it? I mean, I presume I give them the benefit of the doubt that that's not what it means. But what does it actually mean? Because as you say, I mean, race is not the issue. Cultural differences in a society, when can really be an issue. We see this right across Europe at the moment. With there was an incident in France that didn't get a lot of attention in the Irish media, of a Jewish girl of 12 being effectively gang raped because of her religion. Um, by perpetrators of a different religion, which I won't mention, but I think people can probably figure out which religion that was. That is not a race issue. That is a culture issue. That is a what do you believe? Are your beliefs compatible with society? The color of your skin is not relevant to whether you are compatible with a society. It's what in your belief system that is relevant whether you're compatible with a particular society. Which is why, I as a white person could go. People say, there aren't many white people in Japan. That's true, but one of the reasons is I find it very difficult to fit in culturally there. It's nothing to do necessarily with the color of my skin. There are many white people who live in Japan who've completely subsumed Japanese culture. And it's just a lot more difficult to do than it is to fit in, that than it is to go to the United States where everyone understands what the culture is and it's easier to fit in with. So I think that that culture conversation is one we're not having. Instead, we're having this bullshit conversation about race. That's
Yeah, and
that's
that's great.
that's my two cents.
We need a special rapporteur to train us how to not be racist.
Hmm.
Oh, I don't know.
Anyway,
I don't know anymore. I mean, let's see what happens. But I felt like that interview was extremely patronizing and not, very divisive. And I don't need to be trained to not be racist. Thanks.
yeah.
Any more than you don't need to be trained to beat a woman. You know what I mean? In the street. Like, it's just, yeah, of course racism exists. Of course racism exists. Racism exists in every society, fine. But this narrative that's emerging, that Ireland has this massive far right problem with racism, whatever. It's just not true. I'm sorry. I'm not buying it.
Wow. All right. Well, another thing people aren't buying really this week is your old friends in Independent Ireland. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to let you clarify your own position on this because Kieran Malooly, who was a candidate alongside your guy in the European elections, announced this week that he was joining the European Democrats, a political party that believes in a whole string of things. They want a Europe that is transgendered and transnational. They want to abolish national vetoes over all areas of EU policy. They want what they call a European Defence Union, with an abolition of the veto over defence. They want, what else do they want? Loads of good stuff now. They want to, oh yeah, they're whipped to vote for European Union wide hate speech laws, including on the grounds of gender. So like, what do you make of that? You're all in favour of those things now, are you? Because you worked with Independent Ireland, of course.
Um, so I worked for Niall Boylan. Um, and I suppose what I'll say is that I've never even met Kieran Malooly, so I can't speak for him. Kieran Malooly can do, and obviously does do, whatever Kieran Malooly wants. But I'd like to think that people who listen, well, how long am I doing this podcast now? A year and a half.
Yeah.
Um, and even before that, like when I was no longer a member of Fianna Fáil quite a long time ago or whatever, that I've like had my own opinions for quite a long time now, like 10 years. And I think in some ways, maybe even more kind of loyal to my views on certain things because I've had them when they weren't particularly popular. Like it's much more popular and socially acceptable to talk about the transgender issue now than it was 2 or 3 years ago, but I did. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I would like I take and again I've said on the podcast lots of times like I change my mind about things, whatever, but there's fundamental things, abortion, transgender thing, and lots of other things. And I'm very I'm not gonna, like I'm very sort of committed to my views on some of those issues, even more so because I had them when it was difficult to have them. It was difficult to be in Fianna Fáil as a young kind of like female candidate for Fianna Fáil in Dublin and be pro-life. It wasn't popular. Micheál didn't like it. Micheál had changed his mind a few minutes before and suddenly that wasn't popular. So whatever. So I would never, ever, ever be aligned again or like suddenly because of Kieran Malooly align myself with a party that was in favor of transgenderism being taught to children, in favor of no limit, no, as far as I know, no limits on abortion, like, and all of the other things that this group that he's aligned himself with. I would never ever do that. I would be quite like I would be quite fair, I feel, to politicians who, will run in an election, talk about certain issues, and then go into coalition with another party and have to concede some territory on those issues or whatever. But Kieran Malooly got elected about 45 minutes ago, and he's straight in with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Everything I thought, or people, I'm sure his voters thought that he stood for, has been abandoned, and he's aligned himself with a group that is positions itself on issues in a way that I never ever would. So, I mean, I couldn't be clearer. And Niall is the same. Like, Niall has come out this week with a tweet. He's clarified his position. We would never have joined that group. Niall was always going to join the ECR. And look, I appreciate that no group is perfect and the group thing in Europe is difficult or whatever, but absolutely no way on earth would I align myself with any of the positions that grouping has, and I really don't know what Independent Ireland are going to do. And to be fair, they don't have a whip system, so they're in a bit of a pickle, I think. They haven't made a statement yet, so I don't know. But I was more of a Niall Boylan person than an Independent Ireland person, and even if I'd been an Independent Ireland person, I'd be pretty baffled today, to be
Well,
honest.
there are two things on this. I mean, first of all, Little Birdie tells me, and just for I should say, first of all, I mean, obviously, I know everything you say is true, and just so we're clear, I understand what Sarah's position is, and and what she says about her own position is entirely correct. But a Little Birdie tells me, nevertheless, that it's not just Kieran Malooly, that Independent Ireland have in fact been in negotiations to join this group en masse, at least at leadership level. But secondly, what strikes me is, like, it didn't kill you to say what you just said. And yet there's been absolute radio silence from Michael Collins, Michael Fitzmaurice, Richard O'Donoghue, and whoever I'm leaving out um, on this. And that strikes me as political malpractice. I mean, if it was me in there with them, I would have had a press release out by 8 o'clock that evening going, look, Kieran Malooly, we don't have a whip system. Kieran Malooly can sit with whoever he wants, but our values do not align with those of that group. Um, you know, get ahead of it. But they just look shifty as the week goes on over this one. And I understand entirely why people are as kind of angry and cheesed off as they are, including, I can tell you, quite a few people who were elected for them in the local elections
Yeah.
and people who ran for them and weren't elected in the local elections or in Niall Boylan's case, the European elections. So yeah, it's just baffling. Carry on. Um, but it's a
It's
bold
also
strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
it's also just for politics in general, like I know, and anybody who listens to this podcast who's canvassed in the last say year I'm sure agree that the kind of credibility, the belief, the trust in politicians is diminishing by the day. And so it makes the whole it undermines people's belief in politicians even more, and it's just really sad. um, and damaging for people who want to run, whether they're independent in Ireland or not. You're like anybody who's running as an independent now will have to listen to this for a while, and that's really disappointing and really, you know, annoying for them. But I honestly don't know. I mean, it's not what I would have done. It's not what Niall would have done. Now, like I managed Niall's campaign for him. If Niall went over there and decided Niall can join whatever group he wants, and there's nothing I, as his former campaign manager, could do or say about it. But I know Niall very well. We've had so many, like, deep and meaningfuls about key issues in politics. Um, and I know his position on things, and I know he wouldn't have joined this group because he wouldn't have, been able to,
Hmm.
he doesn't agree with anything they think. So,
Yeah, whereas
um,
Ciara clearly does, because I mean they're whipped on some of this
obviously,
stuff. Like it's people, like some people are trying to make an excuse for him and going, oh well, it's not really a whip system. It's just about getting speaking time and all the rest of it. I'm sorry, the Renew Group is not going to tolerate an MEP in their ranks who stands up and goes, well, I disagree with absolutely everything my group stands for. Bullshit. No, they're whipped on a lot of these issues to vote in particular ways on particular EU votes. They have guidance on how to vote. If somebody thinks Kieran Maloney is going to be actually, is going to come out at the 11th hour as some kind of conservative figure after joining this group, I think they're lining themselves up for disappointment. So look,
no. But there's a lot of rage out there. The Twitter sphere is very unhappy.
mm, oh
So
well,
I think you're right that a statement needs to be made fast. Um, but I haven't seen anything. So
yeah. You mentioned something there that actually is relevant this week that I had entirely forgotten. So a surprise issue for you because we didn't even discuss it before the show, but we should mention it, which is that the abortion figures came out.
hmm.
Um, and there were 10,000 abortions last year in Ireland, which is a number that kind of produced kind of gasps of shock from pro-life people and a shrug of the shoulder, it seemed to me, from almost everybody else. Which I kind of I don't want to big myself up because I was involved in a campaign that was defeated by 2-1. But I remember the last debate I did on the abortion referendum in 2018. I said the most pernicious thing about voting yes for this is the way it will change the culture, in that abortion moves, when you legalize it, from being the last resort of a woman in a desperate situation to being the first option presented to her. And I think the figures are bearing that out. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's the thing about that kind of data is that you can just look at it from other countries, and this is the pattern it follows in every country.
Hmm.
And we're also, it comes back around to what what we would say about other issues, which is that you know there is a lot about this issue people are just not willing to discuss. They don't want to talk about it. It's all about more access, more access, more access, and it's never about, well, what are the like. My argument about this always would be that there are women who make a choice to terminate a pregnancy. Fine, leave them in one category. But there's also women who have terminations, not, and they want them to have the choice to have those terminations. But the choice is actually that they don't have a choice. They're having an abortion because of economic reasons and fear and whatever else. And I've never seen, you'll always have people throwing in at pro-life people. Well, do you adopt? Do you bring people into your house? And what do you do about the children that are abandoned or whatever? But at the same time, like, what about women who want to have the baby but can't afford it or whatever? Like, where's the increase in services for them? Where's the increase in services for women who want to leave a domestic violence situation and, have their baby if they're pregnant? Like, there's no, it's exactly to your point that the culture becomes that this is the first option, the easiest option. And obviously, it's horrific. Nobody would want, even the most pro-choice people that I'm friends with wouldn't want their daughters to have an abortion. So, but the fact is we don't discuss it. We act like it's not there. We give it the old Irish under the rug, and we act as if, the 10,000 is nothing to see here. But I know a lot of people, and you say that the referendum was defeated 2-1, but a third of Irish society voted against that, and I think that a percentage of the people who voted yes didn't vote for this.
Oh, I think that's indisputably true. But I mean, it doesn't really matter And
No, well,
I don't say this to be harsh. I mean, if you're one of those people who voted yes because you cared about the hard cases, I mean, your motives don't really matter in terms of the outcomes that the result produced. But you said something about the lack of supports, and it's interesting that you mentioned that in a week when the Minister for Health, old Conehead himself, came out to announce that we are obviously increasing the availability of free contraception to women aged 32, 35. It was also the week in which Simon Harris declared that he wants Ireland to be the best country on earth to raise children in. So you've those three stories all in one. You've 10,000 abortions, free contraception for women aged 32 to 35. By the way, a fourth story, which is that our birth rate is now basically below replacement level. So our natural population increase is I think if it hasn't already, it's about to tip into negative numbers, more people dying than being born. Um, we're giving out free contraception, as I said, and Simon Harris says he wants to be the best country on earth to raise children in. I mean,
but if we
it's
want to be the best, sorry, John, if we want to be the best country on earth to raise children in, I mean, that's wonderful. Saying it aloud won't make it so. And there are such obvious things. Like, I've said this before, I have three children, right? Having kids is really expensive. And there's all these, I'll give you a really simple example of a thing that could be fixed overnight and isn't, right? And now I'm on my third child, and because of the months that they're born, experiencing this with the second child, right? So all you hear all the time is that your children get 2 free preschool years. Have you heard this?
mhm.
So the ECI scheme, right? So your children will get 2 free preschool years, okay? And that allows your child to go to a Montessori for, I think it's 3 hours a day for 2 years before they go to school, okay? Now, if your child doesn't turn whatever the age is, three, I think it is, by the 31st of December in the year before or the year that they're starting, they don't qualify. So, for example, my second son, Connor, his birthday is the 11th of January, meaning that he didn't get for 2 free preschool years because he didn't qualify. His birthday was too late. So he only got one. And the first year, because of COVID, he'd been in the house for so long, he wanted to play with other kids. I sent him to Montessori, but I had to pay for it. I had to pay for the Montessori myself because he was 11 days, born 11 days past the cutoff. So he did his first free preschool year, but I paid €1,000 a month for it. And then the second free preschool year he got for free, and then he went to school. So we never got the two. Now I have another child, 2.5, looking to start Montessori in September, October. Her birthday is in March. She's also missed the thing, so I'll pay €1,000 a month for her to go to Montessori next year as well. Now, you would think if it was really 2 free preschool years for all children, just give them the 3 preschool years, the 2 years that start whenever you want them to start. And if you want them to have a third year in Montessori because you don't feel like they're ready for school, you make that decision and you pay for it then. But two of my kids, so I'll have three children technically entitled to 6 free preschool years, and I will have only gotten four. Do you know what I mean? Now
Yeah.
that's the thing I've raised with TDs, people I know who are politicians. I've raised it with them and said, this is a flick, this is a really annoying thing that costs me €10,000 a year twice, right? €1,000 a month for 10 months. All you have to do is just change the date so that and they can't. So don't tell me you care about making it the best place in in the world to raise children when you can't even fix stupid shit like that. There's no tax back on childcare. Like, I have multiple friends, I've discussed them on this podcast, who limit the amount of children they have because of affordability. So our replacement rate is low, and people are having children later, so there's fertility issues or whatever. But if you have two parents who are working, you get nothing for being a parent except €140 a month per child, which will buy them a whatever. And then you get 2 free preschool years, but you don't even get that unless their birthday is certain specific months of the year. Like, go way out of that with the best place in the world to raise children. Do the bare minimum. Like,
You
do the bare minimum.
you might not know the answer to this question, but it's a question that strikes me nonetheless as important. And if you don't know the answer, you're free not to know the answer. But if you don't have a medical card, how much roughly are you going to pay for oral contraception a month as a woman?
You don't have a medical card.
Yeah, if you're just paying for it over the counter like a normal person.
Well, I actually do know the answer. Well, there's different brands of oral contraception or whatever, but I think some oral contraception is literally like €8.95 a month.
Hmm. Because we're giving that out free to women of childbearing age, which is just, I mean, look, I'm not making any comment here about people's right to access contraception if they wish it. It's a free country. There are lots of
Yeah.
reasons for taking contraception. Maybe you've children already. Maybe you're taking it for medical reasons that aren't to do with reproduction at all. But why are we giving this to people for free? It's bullshit. Like it's complete pandering. I mean, it's a country that if you're a young woman, we can't keep you safe on the streets. We can't get you on the housing ladder, but we can subsidize your sex life. I mean, this is
Also,
it's like
it's so cheap that it's all about the optics. It's not really like, do you know what I mean? The amount of money that it is, it's kind of like whatever.
and
It's
by the way,
not. It's like
yeah, and by the way, people remember when this was brought in, when Simon, and it was actually Simon Harris when he was Minister for Health after his triumph in 2018, where he single-handedly delivered the abortion referendum. One of his sops to pro-lifers, as he pitched it, was we're going to give women free contraception to reduce the incidence of abortion. So the policy, as it was rationalized when it was brought in, isn't even working on its own terms because the abortion numbers are going up anyway, dramatically. They've increased by 66%, in fact, since we legalized abortion, even with the free contraception for young women, which suggests the policy isn't even working on the terms that it was brought in, but we're expanding it anyway because you go, girl. Like that seems to be the attitude. And meanwhile, as you say, we can't do anything for parents who actually have kids. And then you've got this joker saying we want to be the best country in the world in which to raise a child. Um,
I forgot
best
to mention
co- it's the best country in the
one
world
other
if you want to buy a child, by the way. We sorted that out last week.
yeah. You do get free GP care for your kids up to 8 or whatever it is now, or is it 7? And like I don't want to diminish that for other people because I'm sure that that's really, really useful for people who have kids who are sick. And I'm very lucky in the sense, as you know, my sister's a doctor. So my kids would, I mean, and I have a very good friend who's a neighbor who's also a doctor. So my kids would never really need it. So, but it is there in fairness, and like that's something for people. But I just think that the amount of money that people and one of my friends, very good friends, had a baby, and then she was talking about how she couldn't afford to have three. She was going to have one more, and she had twins, and her childcare, so her crash and then childcare bill and whatever a month was over €2,000.
Hmm.
And we want to be the best country to raise kids in. Like that problem's been there for years. People have been talking about it for years. People I know who'd love to have another kid don't because they don't want to go back to the start. They don't want to go back to paying €1,000 a month in crash. And, like the other countries have ideas for how to incentivize people to have kids, but like coming out and saying, "Oh, we're going to be the best country to raise kids in," with absolutely nothing behind it. Spare me.
Do you think there's a bigger issue here, bigger long-term structural issue with the way we've structured society? Because I have a growing army, which will soon be a full football team of nieces and nephews if people don't get a hold of themselves soon. And those children are arriving at a rate of knots, and the people who are producing them, who I love dearly, and I'm joking by the way.
I love as well, and I love as well because I've met them.
Yeah, I'm joking by the way if you're listening. But in fairness, they have the option, as many people living in rural Ireland or in farming communities do, or if you've got relatively young parents yourself, my parents are doing, they should be earning thousands in childcare. And they're not
Yeah,
the only ones. Right across the country, there are people who have grandparents basically helping raise their kids, which is a huge advantage. The people living in Dublin and other cities don't, because we've atomized our society to the degree where, what used to be the case where people were living in close proximity to their extended family. That just
yeah.
isn't happening anymore. So basically we've made the state into like a kind of quasi family support agency, which it's shit at, and transparency shit at. So I mean, I just think that a lot of this, I was chatting to Laura Perrins this week and Neve, because Neve is somebody who's Neve Green, who writes for Gript, she's very concerned with the fertility issue, and Laura Perrins is also concerned about it. And one of the things that's interesting is that countries in the West that try pro-natalist policies, so throwing more financial support to people, for example, Hungary, I think tax exempts women who have more than three kids. All these policies, which are good policies in their own ways, but they aren't
Oh,
necessarily.
what's the country that you get a percentage of your mortgage interest rate for every child you have?
I'm not sure. It might be Hungary as well, but definitely in Hungary, if you're a woman, you pay no income tax for the rest of your life if you've got three kids.
Well, I mean, let's all go there.
Exactly. I don't know if you have to have three more or whether you can just bring three with you. I,
Yeah.
th- I think you probably have to go there and have three Hungarian citizens as well. So,
But if you think about it, my three children, God willing, will be taxpayers who will work and, um, prop up the economy. So that kind of makes sense.
yeah. But anyway, the point. It's true. It's true. I mean, pro-natalist policies make economic sense for that reason. But one of the interesting things is that they're not as effective in terms of actually generating extra birth rate as you'd expect. And I think one of the big reasons is this kind of globalization culture where, I mean, I, for example, live very happily in Tipperary, but all my extended family are in Monaghan, and all Orla's extended family are in Kerry. So, like, if we had kids, which we don't, we would be on our own. Whereas, those members of both our families who are living closer to their parents and indeed other relatives have more options in terms of, communal child rearing, which is something that Irish society prospered and did a lot with. So that's all gone, which I think is a big factor in the West. When we're discussing this issue, and I'm not really sure. I think it's too big a problem to solve, but it's. I mean, you look at birth rates right across the world; they're
Yeah.
collapsing, and obviously the Greens are delighted about this because we're all wrecking the planet, and I'm not actually somebody who believes we can go on and have like 50 billion people living on the planet eventually. But at the same time, when you get these population pyramids where there are masses of old people and only a few young people in 50 years to pay our pensions, from a purely selfish reason, I want your kids to pay my pension, Sarah.
Yeah.
And yours and Keith's. So there's three pensions they all have to pay by themselves.
Yeah. I know.
Um, so And that, of course, is also driving the immigration issue, which is the other issue that's tearing society apart. So, I mean, there's something fundamentally broken in how we're organizing the society, I think, in both the short term and the long term.
Yeah. It also goes back to, you know, there's a kind of I think it's unraveling a little bit now, but there was a kind of definitely a period there where we were lying to women about, you know, I actually had dinner last Friday with my old kind of he's a career mentor of mine. He's American, um, really interesting guy. I won't name him actually, but he's a Jewish American guy who I worked with for a long time, many years ago, and I haven't seen him in years. And I met him for dinner last week, and he was saying, like, oh, what are you doing now? And like, what's your plan? And you're going to go back to work, and like, you've finished having kids. And he's like, having kids is like a really important part of what you wanted to do with your life. But there's also, things to get, like, he's just, I can't really do him justice in the way he talks, but he's like, but you've work to do and there's work to get back to now. And, like, it's time to like look at how you're going to disrupt things and how you're going to work in this and do this and do this, whatever. And like, for a long, and when he would have been mentoring me, he would have been very honest with me and another guy that I'd work with, and said, like, if you want to be a mother and you want to experience that in life, you're going to have to, it's not, you're going to have to do it earlier. They were very like kind of, not didn't lie to me and say, like, because I think a lot of women are lied to, like, oh, just have whatever career you want. Maybe when you're
Yeah,
40, you'll think about having
you're talking about the companies who are out there who pay women to freeze their eggs.
exactly. And these guys, like the guy I'm talking about that I met on Friday, like, he's 80 something. Like, they would have been in their 60s, 70s when we were having these conversations. And they're like, no, if you want to have kids, make that happen. Make that happen in your early 30s. Or, it might not happen. They're very honest. They're like, career. I remember him saying to me, he's like, if you start your career at 40, if you retire at the average age, you'll have a 25-year career ahead of you. Don't worry about it. Focus on the thing that has a finite, time limit. And worry about the rest of it later. Prioritize your family if that's what you want. And I think a lot of women are told the opposite, and it's not true. And I think that, yes, that's changing a bit now, but for a long time it was like freeze your eggs and girl boss and everything's amazing and nothing, there's no limit and whatever, and it's just a lie. And so I think that um there was a huge problem with that, and like some of the fertility, the numbers and stuff. The truth is, if you want to have one kid, well then yeah, like you can wait. But if you want to have three or four, you can't. Like you're not going to have four kids. Statistically speaking, you're not going to have four kids if you start having kids at 40. You might have one, maybe you'll be lucky and have two. You're not going to have four. And so starting later reduces the number, no doubt about it.
Well, that all brings me to we've 8 minutes or so left, and to the other issue I wanted to discuss on the show, because you last weekend you went and I saw some of the pictures on Instagram. You were looking fantastic, by the way. Although you made poor Keith wear a Travis Kelce shirt, which is terrible. But you went to Taylor Swift, and you can tell us in a second about what that was like. But first of all, friend of the show and occasional Gript contributor, not Gript employee, Gript contributor, John McGlynn, got in awful trouble for an article that he wrote in Newsweek about said Taylor Swift, where he basically said, look, this is a 34-year-old woman who's had a series of relationships and has no children, and is not really a good role model for young women. Were you outraged as other people on the internet were outraged?
I mean, I think that, some of the point he's trying to make is kind of true, but I think he was being very unfair. And I'm going to sound like a super fan now or whatever, but I mean, Taylor Swift is somebody who's 34 years of age, has had a few boyfriends, like has now seems to have
Written
met
songs about all of them, by the way.
yeah, but I mean, like, so. She's also written songs about women that she's had falling outs with. So she writes songs about things that she experiences in her life, whatever. But I think that, she's had boyfriends, sounds like from the songs, been treated quite unkindly at times. We'll never know. But now she's met somebody, she's 34, and she probably, well, she's not telling, if anything, the message she sends to girls is to go out and find men, fall in love. Like, I mean, she's not exactly standing up there singing songs about how, like you shouldn't meet somebody or get married or anything. I'd say she'll get married very soon, and I'd say she'll probably have a family. Um, but I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not going to speak for Taylor Swift, but I think it's a bit unfair, to kind of single her out because we don't really know the story. She could be absolutely desperate for children and has been searching for a man and to fall in love for years. We don't know.
I think that's true. I will say this in John's defense, which was the main attack that was made on him, was that he would never have written that about a man. He never said, look, this man is 34 years old and has a series of relationships and is childless. And that is true. And that's a fair criticism, but it ignores the point that everything you've just said, not about Taylor Swift, but in the previous conversation, which is that if you're 34 years old, unmarried, and as a man, it's not the end of the world in terms of your fertility. I mean,
Yeah.
as many octogenarians out there in America have proven, often
Well, I
quite
mean,
gross ways.
great example of that is, like he's not writing that about like you're talking about she had relationships or whatever, and even one of her songs talks about it. Uh, Leo, whatever his name is, DiCaprio. I mean, like his girlfriend is getting younger by the year as he's getting older, and no one really comments on that. And then there was a great example of it is George Clooney. I mean, George Clooney was this bachelor, man about town, whatever. And then one day, was he in his 50s? He woke up, decided, I think I'll get serious now, married a beautiful, successful woman, and now has children. If he'd been a woman, he wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that is, I suppose that's an example of life being a bit sexist, really, isn't it?
No,
But yeah,
life's not sexist. Life's just not fair. And anybody who was taught, like, there's many, many things about life that aren't fair. One of them is that women's fertility is not forever and men's probably is. And it's not fair, but it is, it's the card you're dealt if you're a woman, and you either like get busy living or get busy crying. You know what I mean? You either accept it and you deal with the cards you have, or you don't. But like, life's not fair. I mean, come on.
all right. I'll end with a note on the concert itself. I read a piece by Emer McLysis in the Irish Times during the week. Now, Emer McLysis is not somebody who would agree with me on basically anything. Um, or indeed you, I suspect. She paid to go to all 3 nights at the concert. She said it was a life-saving experience, not necessarily for her, I should stress, but she said it was. She said Taylor Swift is out here saving lives. She said it was better than therapy and cheaper. Um, like I don't want to diminish things other people are interested in because I mean I will sit in front of the television watching golf or Formula One or snooker or darts if it's on and get lost in it. So I understand there people are interested in things that other people aren't in, but it seemed to me to be just a little bit over the top. I mean she's a songwriter and a pretty good one, but like some of her fans seem to elevate her to kind of godlike status. It's kind of like an argument for how if God didn't exist and maybe he doesn't, man would have to invent him, or woman in this case.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of more with you on this one. I mean, it was, as you say, she's a really good singer and a good song. Like I noticed last week when we did the podcast, we mentioned that I was going, and there was a few people in the comments being like, "Oh, I turned it off at Taylor Swift." It's like, okay, as I said last week, there's a lot of misery in the world. Keith and I went with two friends. We had an absolute ball. We had great crack. Went for dinner, had a few drinks, danced around, and went home. It's not really more complicated than that. Like that, I don't know, are they called Ramstein or something? Some band were in the RDS the week before. I don't know who that is. I don't care if people
Yeah,
are going to that.
they'd be more my kind of
Like,
thing now.
okay, well, there was like fire and stuff coming up and whatever. I saw a video online, and like, if you went to that concert and you had a great time, good for you. Like, I don't care what other people are doing. Like, I don't. It wasn't therapy for me. It wasn't much bigger than that. It was a bit of fun. I got a babysitter for my three children, and I had a night out with my husband and two of our best friends, and we had a great time. Like some people take it way more seriously than that. Good luck to them. If it means more to them and it helps them in some way, good, great, happy days.
Yeah,
To me, it was just
go ahead. Sorry, go
say
ahead.
again.
No, I was just
To
going to
me, it
say,
was a concert, and it was I saw a lot of Eliza Donovan, is it?
yeah,
Um,
Eliza O'Donovan, Social Democrat candidate for mayor and council in Limerick, who won the council election but did not feature in the mayoral election. Go on. What did she say?
she took a picture of herself saying this childless 41-year-old woman is having the time of her life at this concert tonight. And I was like, I just don't think like I think people have we all just forgotten how to just not care that much about what other people are enjoying and go to things and experience them and have fun at them without having to make a point.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
know what I
look,
mean? Like you said, I made Keith wear the jersey. Well, I didn't make him; he wanted to, and it was very funny. And we all had a great laugh about it. And we put a couple of photos up on Twitter and whatever, bit of crack. And then we went home and paid our babysitter, and went to bed. And everybody had a great time. And like, I don't have to put up on Twitter, I'm here because I'm free. Freedom is help. Like, I don't. Yeah, not everything has to be a kind of a political statement about your very strongly held opinions about stuff. Just go to Eliza, just go to the concert and have a dance around and have a drink and chill out.
yeah. Well, I have to say actually, because Eliza is not the only offender. It drives me batty when people who kind of sort of on our side of the political fence kind of fetishize not liking sports or culture. So you get these
Yeah,
people like, oh, I can't believe you watch sports ball. It's when the world is when when the population is being replaced and free speech is being attacked and you're watching Manchester United like you're not serious about all this. Grow up. People can
yeah.
care about more than one thing. People can enjoy things. I was in Madeira
But I
last week.
also
My 66-year-old mother got into a go-kart and drove around a track. No, not as fast as me, obviously. But you just go out and you do things that are fun because you live one life. And when it's over, people aren't going to say, well, he didn't send enough tweets about immigration. I mean,
yeah.
you gotta live life while it's there. And if that means going to look at Taylor Swift, well, you go, girl.
But I also like very much clearly very much like and I'm very much interested in politics. And I just today, for fun, was doing an Excel spreadsheet of turnout versus spoiled votes in different areas of Dublin voters, just for my own interest and fun. But I also, there's very little in TV that makes me laugh as much as some of the Real Housewives TV shows. Like, I have cried laughing at the absurdity of some of those TV shows and really enjoy myself. People can have different views, and who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, well,
It's like
on
it
that,
doesn't make you smarter. Or, you know what I mean? It's just like, let's focus on things that are important instead of making other people feel like crap about liking something. I don't care.
Well,
So
I'm
go
not.
to Ram or whatever that is.
Motorhead. If they come to Dublin, I'll be going to that. Did Triple H's entrance music for WWE for years. Two great tunes, King of Kings and The Game. Anyway, look, we'll leave it there for another week. We've discussed a whole lot in this week's podcast. I've admitted that I was wrong about Joe Biden, so people might forgive me about that. And of course, there's a UK election, which the results will be known when you're listening to this. I mean, we already know the results, even though people haven't voted yet. And I'm going to Ukraine tomorrow. So next week's podcast, I will tell you all what it's like in that country and whether there's any need to flee or what it's like. And that might be interesting. So we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks, Sarah, for joining me as always. And we'll be back this time next week for another edition of The Week That Really Was.